Here's a thought experiment. What could get Donald Trump to drop Mike Pence as his running mate for re-election at the Republican convention? What if the Democratic nominee for president has no military experience, which is true of almost all of the Democratic candidates, but that Democratic nominee chooses a running mate with military experience? Would Donald Trump want to have military experience on the ticket with him? Would he push out Mike Pence and replace him with Mike Pompeo, who is a West Point graduate? That's why you have to look at the field of 21 Democratic candidates for president and pick two. Pick two. Pick your favorite for president and pick one for vice president. Pick one who you think adds something to the ticket. That's why you have to give all of the candidates a good look, no matter where they are in the polls. Congressman Seth Moulton is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Business School, and he is a decorated combat veteran, a Marine who served 4 tours of duty in Iraq. Congressman Seth Moulton is now a candidate for president. If he ends up on the Democratic ticket, might he actually knock Mike Pence off the Republican ticket? That is not a question for Seth Moulton. That is a question for you voters to consider as you strategically evaluate everyone in the Democratic field of candidates. Joining us now is Congressman Seth Moulton, Democratic member of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts and a candidate for president. You are running for president. You are not running for vice president. And so I want to ask you, as I've been asking all of the candidates, what they would actually do sitting in the White House in that job. And I want to begin tonight by showing you something that the current occupant of the job said today about Iran. Let's listen to what the president said about that.
We'll see what happens with Iran. If they do anything, it will be a very bad mistake. If they do anything, I'm hearing little stories about Iran. If they do anything, they will suffer greatly. We'll see what happens with Iran.
If you were asked the question, are we going to war with Iran, sitting in the Oval Office, what would you say?
Well, first of all, I've fought Iranians before on the ground in Iraq, Najaf 2004. It was bloody. We won. And I'd fight Iran again if necessary, but this is not necessary. Sending 120,000 troops into the Middle East because of provocations from Iran. I mean, we had provocations back in September. They attacked the Baghdad embassy. Secretary Mattis, who's fought Iranians, he said, no, we're not going to get into a war. This is chicken hawks in the administration. I mean, if you saw a definition of chicken hawks in the dictionary, it would be John Bolton and Donald Trump. And by the way, I think we all know who's the hawk and who's the chicken. I don't think that Trump even has control over his national security advisor right now. He's trying to drag us into a war with Iran, just like he did 15 years ago in Iraq.
Talk about what it was like to serve in a war that you opposed, and what did that teach you that you would bring to the Oval Office?
That you shouldn't go into war unless it's absolutely necessary. You know, I've seen Marines hurt and killed by Iraqis, by Iranians. You don't fight unless you absolutely have to. And I just don't think that people in this administration understand that. You know, Donald Trump, got out of fighting in his war. Think about the contrast between Donald Trump and John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy used his father's connections to get medically cleared to go to war. Donald Trump used his father's connections to lie about bone spurs so he wouldn't have to serve. And it wasn't like there's an empty seat in Vietnam because Trump didn't go. Someone went in his place. I'd like to meet that American patriot who took Donald Trump's place in Vietnam.
Someone who was processed through the draft board in Queens, where Donald Trump's draft was deferred through that note.
And that's the point. Like, that's why I kept going back to Iraq. I didn't agree with the war. In fact, I was an outspoken critic of it. But I didn't want anyone to go in my place. And I knew that every single day in Iraq, being there on the ground on the front lines, I was able to affect how that war was fought, much more so than being back home. And that's what veterans are all about. They don't go to war because Marines are soldiers. We don't go to war because we think it's perfect. Oh, well, this is a perfect war. We go because we don't want people to go in our place and we want to make it a little bit better. That's serving the country. That's service. That's true patriotism. Not warmongering, not fear-mongering like this commander-in-chief is doing.
Donald Trump has another war going that's going very badly, the Trump trade war with the Trump tariffs. As president, would you repeal the Trump tariffs?
Yes, but we do have to confront China. And this is something that's important. I mean, China is a national security threat. It's an economic threat to the United States. I mean, China is literally stealing our business ideas, our military secrets every day through the internet. That is really costing American jobs. You know, the irony with this administration is that he's allocated more money to build a southern border wall, a 5th century BC technology, than cybersecurity for the entire country. We need to turn that around. I mean, think about it. China debated building a wall like 3,000 years ago, right? They're past that. They're now saying that they're going to lead the world in artificial intelligence. What's our response? Nothing from this administration. They are attacking us through the internet, stealing American jobs. What's our response? Nothing from this administration. So we need to be smart and tough on China. But starting a trade war that just hurts American farmers, hurts American consumers, puts a tax on all the goods. I mean, if you shop at Walmart, you're going to be paying more in the next few weeks because of Trump's tariffs. That's hurting American families. That's not helping us with China. That's hurting us.
Would you join, as President Obama wanted to do, join the Trans-Pacific Partnership as a way of isolating China in the Pacific trade region?
You know, I was very skeptical of the TPP because I didn't think it went far enough to protect for labor and environmental protections. But what Trump has done is just completely pulled out. He doesn't have a seat at the table anymore. You know, you've got to have a seat at the table. You've got to be in the negotiation because otherwise China sets the rules for the Pacific. And Trump is very good at tearing things down. He's disparaged NATO, trying to tear that apart. He's pulled us out of Paris. Think about all the countries that followed President Obama into the Paris Accords. Do you know how many have followed Trump out of them? None. President Obama got Russia and China even to agree to come together to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Trump just pulls out without a plan. No one follows. But now Iran is threatening to become a nuclear power, which we cannot let happen. So Trump is great at tearing things down, but he has no idea how to build things up. The same thing here at home. You know, he's tried for years to take health care away from millions of Americans, to repeal Obamacare without any plan to replace it. What's your plan, Mr. President? We need to show America how we're going to fix these things, and both at home with health care. And I have a plan to bring health care to Americans without forcing them onto a government plan, but also abroad, how we strengthen our alliances, how we build a Pacific version of NATO to contain China and North Korea, how we strengthen alliances like NATO and modernize them when Russia's not attacking us with tanks, but through the internet, how we bring a new generation of leaders into American national security to make America safe and strong in this new world of threats. I think it's time for those of us who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan to step in for those who sent us there.
What is your health care plan?
So I'm the only candidate in this race who actually gets single-payer health care because I made a commitment to continue going to the VA when I was elected to Congress. I said, as long as my fellow vets are going there, I'm going to go there too because we know it's a broken system. And I'll tell you, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. There are some things the VA does well, like they negotiate prescription drug prices. Medicare could learn a lesson from that. Medicare doesn't do that. So VA prescription prices are lower.
Medicare is prevented by law from doing
Correct.
that. Yeah.
Correct.
Would you change that law?
Oh, absolutely. But I would also not force Americans onto a government plan designed in 1963 if they don't want to give up their private health care plan. And why? Because I think competition is good. I think competition is good.
So you'd open Medicare to people who want to use it?
Exactly. This is exactly what President Obama called for in a public option. A public option that competes against private options. And you know what? If it competes them out of business, then so be it. But the point is competition brings down prices for everybody. And think about the U.S. Postal Service. I mean, does anyone, if the next president went to Congress and said, we are going to put UPS and FedEx out of business so they no longer compete with the U.S. postal system, is there any American who thinks that that would be good, that that would improve efficiency or lower prices? No, I mean, just in the same way that competition is good for delivering packages, competition is good for delivering health care. And I say that knowing what it's like to get single-payer health care, to sit in VA waiting rooms where people have literally died waiting to get care. The first time I got surgery at the VA, they sent me home with the wrong medications. So we got to do better than that. And I think that's what the American people want.
Let me ask you about impeachment. If you were serving in the White House and there was a report showing that you had asked the White House counsel to fire the prosecutor who was investigating you. Would you expect to be impeached?
Yes.
Do you think this president should be impeached?
I think we absolutely need to have that debate in Congress. And the right thing
When
to
we
do,
have that debate in Congress, are you going to say yes or no?
I mean, you can tell where I'm leaning here, but the right thing to do, the right constitutional duty for us in Congress, is to have that debate before Congress, before the American people, get all the facts, including the full Mueller report. We don't even have that yet, and then you have a vote. But I think our party made a mistake by not starting that debate. I called for this debate. I voted for it last year, because we should be having this discussion. And there are a lot of people who argue that, oh, it's politically, that's bad, Seth. You know, it's not the right time politically. It's bad for the 2020 election. Well, you know, how about putting the Constitution and the country first? You know, how about doing what's right, regardless of what the politics are? That's what we do. I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Not my political party, you know, not my political future. It's the same oath I swore as a United States Marine officer. We've got to uphold that oath. And holding the administration accountable is in the Constitution. That's our constitutional duty.
Congressman Seth Moulton, presidential candidate Seth Moulton, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.